We start with the weather because many of us have been affected by wild weather of late, and the homes of many residents in Johannesburg remain underwater after flash floods on Thursday. That's just one example. The South African Weather Service has issued an orange level 5 warning, meaning there could be severe thunderstorms in Southern Gauteng. To discuss, we're now joined by Applied Climatologist Dr. Peter Johnston. Doctor, thank you for being with us. Can you give us firstly a bit of a national picture? It seems like the rainfall and storms in Gauteng have been incredibly intense. Is it unusual, and what's happening in other parts of the country?
Well, Francis, thank you for having me. And first of all, let me say how sorry I am that people have been affected by this flooding. It's certainly not what one intends in an urbanized area, and one hopes that the water that falls gets run off into the river safely, but clearly that hasn't been happening. So the question is, are these storms abnormal? Are they more intense than they've been in the past? And the answer is actually no. It's kind of a situation which we call climate variability, that we do get this flooding from time to time. We do get hailstones the size of tennis balls from time to time. And during a period of La Nina, which is what the phase we're currently in. Now, La Nina is a phase in the Eastern Pacific, which has a high correlation to the weather in Southern Africa. So when we get a La Nina, we get a drying summer in the summer rainfall region, and El Nino brings us a drying, and a La Nina brings us a wetter than normal summer rainfall. So the onset of the summer rainfall season was a little late this year, but what happened is when it did arrive, there was so much moisture and so much latent heat in the atmosphere, combined with the fact that it's a La Nina, and we've had very much more intense thunderstorms and heavy rainfall than is normally the case. Now, this was expected, and warnings have been issued every year for the last 3 years, because this is the third consecutive La Nina, that excessive rainfall and possible flooding is possible. So that's really the situation. Unfortunately, the systems aren't able to cope with the amount of rainfall, and that has affected human habitation and in fact, in some cases, loss of life.
And would that account for flooding in Durban as well, and the wild weather that we've seen over the last 3 years then in various parts of the country?
Yes, to a certain extent. Durban also has a slightly different climate to the Highveld because they're at the coast, and then they have at the mercy of coastal disturbances as well. So it's much more difficult to predict what's going to happen in Durban than it is in the Highveld, because they're not quite as dependent on the La Nina systems. But yes, we know, generally speaking, that the summer rainfall region has been a lot wetter than normal in the last 2 years, and certainly it was predicted that this year it was going to happen. What we can't predict is when exactly floods are going to happen, and in fact the Weather Service, which normally uses radar to be able to track storms very, very accurately and give a high degree of warning, those radars are out of order. So in fact, we're at a bit of the mercy of the weather now, and unfortunately it's a combination of poor infrastructural planning, too much rainfall, and high levels of exposure in areas where people are living where possibly they were not supposed to be living.
So why are those detectors not working? Is it a lack of cash for the Weather Service?
Yeah, you'd have to ask them, but certainly some of them haven't been working for over 10 years, and one would have to ask them. I know it's expensive to repair radar, but it's just very sad that they're not working. Yeah. It's one of the early warning systems that we do have the capability, but they're not operating.
Sure, but how much of a risk is something like that? Because remember, when tsunamis hit other parts of the world, the big concern was always, well, why weren't systems in place to warn people?
Yeah, no, I suppose it's a little unfair to criticize the Weather Service for that. The radar is there to detect oncoming storms, and with a more precise location, sort of 30 or 40 kilometers away, they can see the storms moving and they can put warnings. But the Weather Service isn't liable for where people are living and the infrastructure where people are living. So they can give a warning, which we have done about heavy rainfall, but it's up to the municipalities, the councils, and the engineers in charge to make sure that the runoff and the culverts and the runoff, the river basins, and those are capable and prepared for that sort of runoff. And that's what we've been saying all the time, is that climate change is certain. We know that it's going to happen, but we can't say exactly what's going to happen. But we are saying to the authorities, look, we're expecting the rainfall to become more intense. And when it becomes more intense, how are you going to cope? And we know that means increasing the size of the culverts. It means increasing the amount of planning that goes into 50-year floods, 100-year floods. These are going to become more common. So we can't say, okay, it's going to be flooding in this area, but we can say you need to be more aware that these kind of things are going to happen more often. And, you know, things like hailstones, people are saying, why are the hailstones so big? Is that climate change? Well, no, it's not. But it can be attributed to the general warming of the atmosphere. And that means that the storms are more intense, and the hail, which goes up and down in a very, very strong thunderstorm, it happens more often, and those hailstones get bigger and bigger. So one must be careful not to lay too much blame at anyone's door, except to say that the warnings have been issued. We do have enough knowledge to know when there's a likelihood of a wet season or a dry season, but we cannot predict how much rain is going to fall in an hour, a week ahead of time.
Yeah, all right, sure. As regards to the La Nina, I mean, I associated with India when you just see the rain pouring for days and days. So is there an end to when we will be affected by that?
Yeah, India's got a monsoonal system, which we have a little bit in the coastal regions on the eastern coast, but that's a much more intense system. La Nina it doesn't have a direct effect. You know, we can't say there's something happening in the Pacific causing the rainfall, but we do know that there's a high correlation between the amount of convection, and that's the warm rising air. So we have hot temperatures, we have rising air, and there's a lot of moisture feeding into that. So the low pressure is enhanced, the rising air is enhanced, the thunderstorms and the storms and the rainfall are more intense. Now, we know that it's a summer rainfall season. The rain falls from round about late September to the end of March. This year it was late. We had very little rainfall in September and October. They were crying out for rainfall. And then it came in a deluge in November and December. Now, we can't say when this rain is going to stop, because La Nina almost every time kicks in January and February, more so than in November and December. So we are fully expecting it still to be wet up till March. But we cannot say that it's going to be so much wetter or so much rainfall is going to fall. But the warning stands that this is likely to be a very wet season. So let's learn our lesson from where it is flooded now and make sure that we are prepared for the next few months. It is the summer rainfall season after all.
All right, thank you very much. Applied climatologist Dr. Peter Johnston.